All right. Thank you so much. So, hello, everyone, and happy Tuesday. I hope that you're all doing well today. This is our third session together. And just to prepare you, today we're talking about people and diversity, inclusion. And so, I encourage you all to be prepared to share, to talk with each other. We do have an activity that we'll do today where I'll actually have you guys go into smaller breakout rooms so you can actually get to know each other. So I always like to say that because people get nervous about breakout rooms if you don't give them a heads up. So I'm hoping that nobody disappears with me to the breakout room assignments. So I like to give folks a heads up on that. I am so happy to be here with you all today and really excited about this particular topic and thinking about the equity in people. We have had quite a bit of a journey so far. We've talked about a lot of the foundational concepts. We've talked about data. Hopefully you all were able to see those resources. And today we're looking at the people power behind the things that we do. Most of you all, I think everybody I see is familiar to me, I believe. You might have maybe one person who might be new today. I've been working in prevention for quite a while. The topics of diversity, equity, inclusion, and problematic substance use have been like kind of at the core of the work I've been doing for years now. I love, love, love this work and just see so much opportunity and potential for us to make impactful change in the communities that we serve. As we get started today, I did want to share a thought just to be in alignment with our topic today, which is thinking about people. And there is a concept around land acknowledgements that has come up many times. There's a lot of discussion about it. And I don't necessarily do land acknowledgements in my trainings, but I always like to mention them to make sure that for folks who do use them, that you really truly create the right intention around it. What I have noticed just in a long history of having first started with cultural competence training, people remember those days, that some of the things we do as a bit of like a requirement or a checkbox, if you will. And so I always like to create a little bit of intention around that. So this quote here that I share with you is to remind us that when we talk about land, land is a part of who we are. It's a mixture of our blood, our past, our current, and our future. We carry our ancestors in us, and they're around us, as you all do. And I really love this quote because what I have learned in my time of understanding the purpose and intention around land acknowledgements is first recognizing history and being really, really open and honest about history in general. And so I know even for you all in your region, I'm sure there is a long history of the first peoples, right? And the colonialism, right? So you all may be in a place and space where land acknowledgements is something you're really thinking about. So there's just a short video I want to share with you that I think create some awareness around what to think about if you're going to choose to think and look at land acknowledgements as something that your organization wants to do. So I want to share this quick video with you before we get started today.
Ichaya, Squale, Thana Naomi Bob, Tanetsan Snetnowis. How are you? Good day. My name is Naomi and my family is from Snetnowis, Orananis First Nation on Vancouver Island. I also have family from Lyaxon First Nation, Peguis First Nation, and Melbu, Norway. Something that has come up a lot in recent years is the change in utilizing land acknowledgements during different meetings, different events. And land acknowledgements have historically always been done by different nations. When you visit, there's different protocols that you would follow. So this isn't a new thing. This is definitely something that has always been, but we're seeing a lot more non-Indigenous people and organizations engaging with land acknowledgements. And while I believe that land acknowledgements are important, I am also seeing them done in a way that isn't helpful. I'm seeing land acknowledgements done in a way that is tokenizing and minimizes responsibility and minimizes our history. I believe the way to do a land acknowledgement, if you are going to engage with it, is to do it in a genuine way that connects you as a person to the land that you are acknowledging and the people that you are acknowledging. So it's really easy to say, list off your host nations that you found off of a Google search, but I want to hear how you as an individual have ended up on their land. I want to hear about what you are doing, the work that you're doing to reconcile responsibilities that you've inherited from your families. And I want to hear about your whole truth about who you are as a person. I heard someone do a land acknowledgement. She acknowledged that she has family, ancestors who worked in residential school, and she was acknowledging that because she knew that it was important to the work that she was doing, and that she has inherited responsibility from that family member who worked in residential school and supported it. And that's when I understood that land acknowledgements can be done in a genuine way that are beneficial to everyone's learning.
Sorry, I was double muted. I'm just curious, before we kind of move on to this part here, and I will stop sharing just real quick. How many of you all have been hearing about land acknowledgements? Anyone using them right now? I just have a little bit of dialogue about this because I do think it's important. It's something that comes up a lot, and sometimes it's an immediate reaction that people even have to sessions like this. So I want to take just a moment to have a bit of conversation about how land acknowledgements are showing up. What are people thinking about it right now? Thank you, Sandra. Yes, please go ahead.
We have a senior in high school, so we started searching for college tours about a year ago. And in doing that, I was impressed when we went to URI, University of Rhode Island, where it was, oh, and by the way, the context is that there had not been tours in person as often because of COVID. And then tours began with masks, and we all had those on. And so there were just crowds beyond their expectations coming in February of last year. And, like during February vacation week. So we didn't expect that. We had many tours lined up, and we went to them, and there were hundreds of parents and kids and guardians attending these. And at URI, they had a newish facility, and we went into this massive room and sat. There must have been, I don't know, I'm not really good at estimating. It might have been 200, 300 people to take tours. And so we were in the back row, but the very first slide was a land acknowledgement about the peoples who had settled there first. And what I learned afterwards is a lot of what I saw at UConn, at UMass, a lot of the state schools, at least UVM, that they have done the same, and that their history of their school has oftentimes been due to this Congress, bill that passed in the late 1800s, where that agricultural land was able to acquire land, and there started a very small agricultural school, and then it evolved into a larger, obviously, universities. And so everybody has a history, like the woman just said in the video, but I think systems have them too in schools. And I really, really appreciated them starting off that way, because it just gave us some broader thinking for, where should you do a lot of thinking at a college campus. So I thought it was a nice way for all ages to be introduced to those schools in a inclusive way and just a broader thinking way.
Okay, thank you for that. Carol, you had a thought you wanted to share?
Yes, just
Oh,
briefly,
okay.
we have been able to learn a vast amount from every training Department of Public Health, BSAS, has with our grants. In the past few years, they have done a land acknowledgement, even our technical assistance provider, CSPS, and they remind us that in Massachusetts, there's 2 federally recognized tribes and then others. So it's been a positive, and obviously in where we are in Massachusetts with the history and the colonization, an important reminder. But truthfully, in any other programs that I'm usually on, or meetings in my town where I'm on the Board of Health, or I don't hear this, and it's not frequent.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Yes, please. Allison.
I've done land acknowledgements in the previous organizations I've worked at meetings and conferences and at like Thanksgiving, I do them, but I really appreciate in the video taking it to another level. I was doing it more as she was talking about, like more surface level, just acknowledging the land, who was there, the first peoples on the land, but not really my personal connection to the land and my responsibility in terms of like the historical context. So I really appreciate that, taking it to another level, so it's not just a surface level kind of statement, but it really means something. Thank you for
Exactly.
sharing that video.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts people want to share about this? I know we're seeing it more and more, and it's, I always have a immediate response to things that feel like, here's the new bag wagon, and for some respects, it's felt a little bit like that. I just encourage folks to have some really thoughtfulness around what it is if you're going to choose to do it. I love when she said, make it more than just a Google search that you might have done, right? And really kind of thinking about the true, tangible history of people, right? So thank you all for thinking about that, and I encourage you all to continue to think about that, especially as we move through the content today, which is really focused on people. It's focused on how we work and do our work together, how we honor diversity amongst each other while also still being inclusive. And so I'm really excited about our conversation today. Let's start with our intention setting activity here to really get us into the conversation today. If you have your workbook, these questions are in there. If you don't, I'm going to say them out loud. All you need to do is grab a piece of paper. I think people know the rules by now. Grab a piece of paper, make your 4 quadrants. And the first thing we're going to do here is just center ourselves for a minute. Remember, I just use a simple 45-second timer. Not a lot of time, but just enough to kind of get us in the right mind frame. So first task is to, right at the center, let's draw our tightest spiral. I've got the timer started here. And as I always say, make sure you're breathing. All righty, so our first question in the top left corner. When you think about diversity and inclusion, what comes to mind? When you think about diversity and inclusion, what comes to mind? Our second question won't even take you the full 45 seconds. The second question is, do your staff demographics reflect the cultures present in the communities you serve? Do your staff demographics reflect the culture present in the communities you serve? You can just comment on that one. Okay. For our third question, which is the bottom left corner, is how do you think the organizational culture can be more inclusive? How do you think your organizational culture can be more inclusive? And then our last question is, what are you hoping to learn from today? What made you sign in to today's session? Okay, all righty. Well, thank you all for getting us started here and centering us around our content today. I have two primary objectives today. I want to talk about bias, how it impacts our prevention practice. I want to spend some time exploring our own personal cultures. You all will get to share a little bit about yourselves. And we'll talk about implicit bias and privilege too today and really think about how that intersects with our work. So for our first objective, this is the one where we're going to do a little bit of work together and a little bit of sharing here. If you have your workbook, the prompts are in the workbook for you. We'll have them on the slide, so you'll be able to answer these questions also. What I'm going to do is I have 4 questions I will ask each of you. So I'm going to ask that everyone grab something to write with if you don't already have the book with you, and simply respond to these questions first. That way you'll have your answers. And then what we'll do, we'll put ourselves in smaller pairs, because we'll just take like 10 minutes for this. That way you can both share with each other. We'll do small pairs where you can share your responses with each other to the degree that you feel comfortable. And then we'll come back as a group to talk more. So we'll go through the questions together. That way you can have them answered. We'll save that time there. So the first question is, think about your name. Share its meaning if it has a particular meaning, or if your parents shared a story with you as to where your name came from. Take a few minutes to think about your name and its meaning and write that down. Right. And I'll just start to reveal some of the other questions. Please take your own pace for whatever's good for you. The second question is, how do you identify? Racially, ethnically, and culturally. How do you identify? Okay, our third question, and it's more of a statement for you to complete. The first time I noticed racial difference was, and just share that thought. The first time I noticed racial difference was. And then the final question, for those of you who are ready, is what is the current landscape, racial landscape of your world? Think about your work, your home, your school activities. With whom do you find yourself associating? What does that picture look like? How diverse is it? How inclusive is it? And just think about those different spaces for yourself. Right. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to at least jot their thoughts down or have an idea of what they are planning to talk about or share. Um, so I
Nicole,
thought him, yes,
um,
yes, Carol.
I had sent you a message. Our tech is a little challenging, and I'm
Okay.
gonna get Karen, but I'm wondering if you can start this out as a group while I get a little organized here, or
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, we can do that. I'll stop sharing so we can see each other. And we're figuring out technology here, so we can roll with it. We can do it as a group if you all feel comfortable doing that also. And ideally, here's what I always like to say about the sharing part. I don't believe people should be forced to share anything they're not comfortable sharing. So here's what I say when I usually do this activity. Feel free to either respond and choose a particular question you'd like to share, or you can just share what was the experience like walking through the questions. Anything that you observed about yourself, were any of the questions challenging for you? You could also give a reflection from that perspective also. Okay, so I want to give people an option to choose what's best for you and what's most comfortable. Originally, we were going to have you all kind of pair up and talk and introduce each other, introduce yourselves to each other, but we'll do it as a group here if folks are comfortable with that. Is that okay with everyone today? Okay, awesome, awesome. All right, so is there anybody who feels so moved to share first?
I could share a little bit. I think Carol might be trying to get some support with setting up breakout rooms. So maybe we can do that later. But I wasn't
Mhm.
there to help today. So, um, well, when I was walking through the questions, when you said that, I started to think about how I was feeling when I was going through them. And I feel like I don't really have a very strong connection to my family's culture. Like my family is Irish, Scottish, and French Canadian. That's what my parents always told us, but we never really had any close ties to the culture or talked about it much. But I do know about my name. That's something that I was thinking about. My middle name is Catherine. So my name, Lydia Catherine, comes from both of my great grandmothers. It's each of their names. And I've always liked that. And I like, if people ask about my name, I like to share that.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, it's interesting to think about the heritage and history, and that not necessarily being something that you've really had an opportunity to connect with. So very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Would you be willing to share, like, in terms of culturally, what you relate to, if not some of the historical ancestry part? How would you, are you comfortable sharing that?
Yeah. I guess I've always felt pretty Irish because both of my brothers have red hair. So when people saw us as kids, they kind of would make comments about like knowing that we were an Irish family. But personally, I've never felt super close to that culture. It just hasn't been
Mhm.
something that's been like very prominent in our family.
Mhm.
My partner's family is Irish. His grandmother is from Ireland, and they talk about it a lot more, and they're kind of more actively involved with that culture. I would say of everything, maybe I feel like the Canadian culture is what's been most
Mm.
prominent in our family because my grandparents are both have families from Canada, and every year they would take a trip back to Canada, come back with a bunch of stuff. They have stories from growing up there. We have photos. They grew up like in rural areas with outhouses in their yards and stuff. So that was something that felt
Yeah.
closer in time to like my grandparents' lives rather than like a distant relative, I guess.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that, Lydia. Carol. Oh, you're muted.
Carol, you're
I
muted.
thought I unmuted. I'm sorry about the tech, and I guess we're just going to roll along. Karen kindly said she'd help, but I will give my background here. My name, I don't really, no one ever told me it had a meaning. I am number two. I identify myself as a white, Italian, Irish, obviously a female. And when I was 11 years old, I'm the youngest of three. My mom had gone back to school. We moved to a different part of the state of Rhode Island. I lived in a very small, non-diverse community, went to a little Catholic school, no diversity. We moved to Southern Rhode Island, right near the University of Rhode Island, and I went to public schools. Sorry for the, and at the University of Rhode Island, diverse professors and students. I met my public school peers from India. We also, in that area, Mashantucket Pequot Indians. So there were a lot of, for the first time, brown and Black friends that I made. And that was a very different experience than my sister, who was older than me, that never got that exposure. So that was the first time that I had an exposure to any diversity. And that's when I noticed racial differences. But no one ever really talked to me about that before in our little community. And then the current racial landscape of my world, Nicole, at home, at school, at work, social activities. Who do I find myself associating with? I live in a community 20 minutes south of Needham, we have very little diversity. Perhaps the percentage of people that identify as Black and maybe, 2%. And that's the way it's been for 31 years, minimal diversity. And at my work, I work for a municipality, I work with 4 towns, and there's very little racial diversity. And my social life is the same, although my neighbors are both, they're Black couple, and we love to, our friendship is growing, and we've been neighbors for 5 years. I don't want to sound, anyway, I'm mindful of the way I sound, but thanks.
No, you're speaking your truth and your reality, and that's okay. No judgment or shame around any of that. Thank you for sharing, Carol. We'll have to look up your name and see if it has, Carol has a meaning. I'm sure it does. Thank you for sharing. Hi, Chrissy. I see your hand.
Hi. Yeah, I'm happy to share, my reflections on this. So my name is Christina with a K. I was named after a close Swedish friend, although I'm not ethnically Swedish. It was just somebody who meant a lot to my parents. Obviously, that my name identifies me as being culturally Christian, because my name means Christ-like. And the first time I noticed that was like in college, where I had a friend ask me if I was like, oh, are you Jewish? Oh, wait, no, with a name like Christina, you're not Jewish. So I'm like, oh, okay. I hadn't even thought that my name identified me religiously, but it did. So racially identify as white, ethnically German, Italian, Scottish, but like Lydia said, I think the like part of the way that like white privilege can manifest sometimes is that it's almost like you don't like think about it that much. It's not true for everybody, but I also didn't really feel like a strong connection to my race, ethnicity, because it was never made like it. Yeah, I was never like forcibly identified by it. And instead, like the culture I identify with is like the Rust Belt, sort of culture growing up in Pittsburgh, like identifying more even as like a millennial, as somebody who's nerdy, as like LGBTQ, like other almost like identities that are not, that are non-racial. And then I guess, yeah, I think I would echo Carol in saying that the workplace, the place I work in, is currently fairly white, although changing over time. And then socially, like my friends are white, Black, Indian, and Malaysian, and I think almost all of them are also like LGBTQ. Like I have very few friends who are like straight and cisgender. So I guess that's, and I guess my last thing I thought about is because I live in Jamaica Plain. It's a like neighborhood of Boston that is multicultural, but it also is getting more and more expensive with gentrification. So even though I live like on a street that has like many multicultural families that have been there for generations, I see people sort of like getting pushed out by the rising rents. So
Oh, wow.
that's my
Thank you for
reflection.
sharing. You shared, yeah, thank you. You shared so much, like all the complexities of our identity. I actually really loved your reflection of recognizing that you have a lot of identities that are not racially bound, and that's really important to think about. This is why I add culture too, because religion is a culture, right? There's a whole host of things. The community environment is a culture too. So I really appreciate you sharing the complexities of identity too. So thank you for that, Chrissy. Anyone else wanting to share their thoughts or something about yourself from this activity?
I'll go. Hi. So, first name, I don't really know if there's any sort of special meaning. My last name is the name of my ex-husband, who's from Lebanon, and I kept the name even though I'm remarried, just so that it would be, I felt for my daughter to keep, some sort of familiarity there. It's interesting. It means in the memory of God in Arabic. I am Jewish by Jewish religion. I guess if your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish, but I have a very complicated relationship with Judaism. Even though my mom and grandmother and their family went through the Holocaust, I have been called a self-hating Jew in the past. I have some, and I don't know where that comes from, but I tend to have struggles around political things. I mean, to be really honest, this is a safe place like in Israel and sort of like the concepts. And I guess I don't really know a lot about Judaism, it's a whole other story. But anyway, I have a lot of complicated feelings from my perception of what Judaism is. And I don't feel, I connect to some of it and then reject a lot. So that's that. And for my daughter, I can imagine that's complicated for her, having Syrian, Lebanese background, Jewish, and she actually went to Israel for the first time a couple of weeks ago, kind of begrudgingly, but it was a good experience. The first time I noticed racial difference, I think, was when I was very little. My mom was involved in the METCO program in Needham, and I remember going to an event at the high school, and I think I was maybe 5 or 4. That was my first memory. In my current racial landscape, I moved to Framingham from Needham and really love the diversity here. In the work and the nonprofit that I run, the music program, I feel that it's more diverse than many places in Needham. It's not as diverse as I would like it to be, but I think that there's things you can do. It's complicated because when we're talking like what are the goals, it's for me, it's around equity, inclusivity amongst learning styles, racial differences, gender, so that's where that is. And friends, well, I feel I don't have tons of friends since the pandemic, a little isolated, but generally I have a friend group that's LGBTQ. And I have some very close friends from Africa, and then my work friends are, I would say, less diverse. So that's me.
Wow, thank you for sharing so much. Really, really. And I appreciate you felt safe enough, because that is the point of these spaces. And so you had me think of something, is if you all choose to use this kind of activity in your work, I encourage you to. It's a really, really great way to learn more about the people who are surrounding you, right? The people who are at the table. Something that I have observed is that when you're in a place that is not racially diverse, a lot of times people think the space is absent of diversity. And that's not true. Okay, so it's really, really important to, even if you look around and everybody, because of the town demographics or whatever the situation may be, is predominantly white, for instance, there's other diversity that's there, right? Diversity of culture, religion, sexual orientation, experience, political views. So what can be really powerful, even about an activity like this, is that you begin to unearth the complexities of all of us. Okay, and begin to see the diversity that lives even beyond our skin color diversity. Okay, and so I really want to encourage you all as you're thinking about, especially this kind of activity, if you want to use something like this to learn more about the people who are around you, it's a really great way of kind of setting an environment of inclusivity. Really, I do believe. I want to give a moment here before we move forward. If there's anyone else who wanted to share something from this activity with the group here, to allow that. And then I'm happy to share also. Great, great. Well, I'll share one for me, which is when I first noticed race. And for me, it happened in between fourth and fifth grade. Our family moved from Inglewood to Edmond, Oklahoma, and I went from a relatively diverse community to being the only Black family in my neighborhood and in most of my classrooms. And I think what was the most interesting part about the journey and experience is that it's like I became aware of my skin in one space that I didn't have that clear awareness in another space. What was also interesting is that even though our family moved to like a 98% white community, we still traveled to go to a Black church. So I had this very interesting dynamic. In my school, I was like a Black person. At my church, I wasn't Black enough. So it was very interesting experience to have because they'd be like, wow, you talk funny or you talk different or why do you talk white? So race is so interesting and complex, you know, and just thinking about all the various experiences people can have depending on the environment that's around them. So I hope that you all found this activity helpful. I encourage you to use it as something you do in your meetings, something you do as a special event to really bring people together to kind of think about. Because even in this space, I learned so much about just a few people who shared, you know what I mean? Just some really interesting things that are behind that are not necessarily visible. Chrissy, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I have a question. I think so. I like spaces like this, like particularly because these are people who all chose to be here, who want to, you know, who I believe are already on board with the cause of DEI. If I were to like sort of picture, you know, like trying to bring this like to the town or department as a whole, or let me walk that back. I just know that sometimes people have pushed back on activities like this. And so I'm wondering if there's like a way to maybe frame it for people who are more like hesitant to engage in it. You know, or like what, like why are we making this about race? Why are we doing this? Like, I'm not saying that I think people will do it, but it's just like a voice in my head that somebody could maybe say, like, why are we doing this activity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it definitely comes up for sure. So what I will actually do, I'll give this to Lydia to share with everyone. This is an activity that actually comes as a part of a larger curriculum that's focused on racial healing and racial equity. And so I'll share the larger curriculum from the World Learning Institute. That way you can see some of the other background. And so they give some other tips and things like that that could be helpful. I usually, if you notice, I wait till session 3 to even dive into this, mainly because we've developed a sense of rapport as a group, okay? And truly to answer some of these questions, people have to feel safe to share, to be respected, to be heard, to be honored. And people also have to be courageous too, right? So, you know, you could run into some different challenges if you haven't done some pre-work, because that's where you get to people like, well, why are we talking about race? You know, and a lot of times you'll hear, we're not that diverse. We don't need to talk about race, you know? So these are some of the ways people talk. And so I find it helpful if I am wanting to move towards something like this, that I do the foundational stuff first, because a lot of times it's that background knowledge that people, even when there's a lack of diversity in the room, race is still very important. unfortunately, because it is the society that we live in. And it's the lens through which a lot of resources are filtered through, access is filtered through. So those are some of the things I talk about. And I find it easier to get to hear when you've done some of the other steps. That would be the short and simple of it. But I'll also share the curriculum with you all because it's got tons of lessons in it. This is just one of them.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Monica, did I see your hand? I thought I saw somebody's hand.
I just wanted to say to Chrissy and everyone, I was thinking when we did this activity, like, why don't we do this more often? It is hard, but like really, I guess it is something that you have to be brave and courageous, but also, you know, what's the point of working with other people unless you really know them? You know, it's a nice opportunity, but you can't force, like Chrissy, you said, like you can't, is this not work? But it really is important. Like what could be more important, you know? But that was just more of a comment or like a statement about like, well, why don't organizations do this more often? I think it's so meaningful.
I agree. I think sometimes we're a little afraid to see what we might unearth when we do activities like this, right? What I recommend is things like this take time too. So you could potentially have the activity be something that people do ahead of time or even do briefly in a meeting like this, but then have the report out and delivery be something that happened over a course of future meetings. So maybe a recurring meeting agenda is learning more about each other. And each meeting, you maybe have 2 or 3 people share until you get through the whole group, however many meetings it takes, right? Because even in this instance, we could only really highlight a couple, which is why I usually do it as pairs, so the pairs get to share with each other. But then you miss the beauty of us sharing as a larger group and learning about each other too. So that's the challenge too, is time. This stuff takes time, and usually we're rushed by grant deliverables, deadlines, you know what I mean? All the other meeting agenda items. Carol.
I just wanted to say that this exercise enabled me to take a step back and listen, and brought up some old tapes in myself. I said at the beginning, I identify as a white, Italian, Irish woman. My grandmother came when she was 8 from Italy, and her mom was a widow. And my mother often said to us, you know, we don't speak Italian in her family when she was growing up. She never spoke Italian as a child and never really said and emphasized the part about my grandmother and being Italian. That's just my maternal side. I say that because I see hope in this younger generation. Like my children have been more accustomed to learning and understanding diversity than someone like me. It was about, you don't want to be anything but American and white, and you have to speak English type of thing. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but there was such a commitment for that my mom's family to fit in, that then the culture wasn't, almost acknowledged and celebrated. But I see differences for my children and their friends through education. You know, they went through public schools, at least more open-mindedness. So thank you.
You make complete sense. And actually, if you think about it, right, you're hitting on some of the history stuff, which is the standard is to be American white. And there have been many, many cultures and groups who have had to let go of that to step underneath the white flag too. The other part that's not talked about, right? Which is that there was a time and space where some people who even had light colored skin were not accepted, right? And wanting to get rid of all that and say, oh, we don't speak this here, we don't talk like this here, because we're attempting to look and be a particular way in society, right? So this is why I say, like, the conversation of race is so powerful because it's impacted so many communities of people throughout the history of time here in America, you know? So thank you for sharing that, Carol. Allison, you had a thought?
Yeah, I love this exercise for so many reasons. And one is that this work of DEI is heart work, right? It's hard work, but also heart work, and it's relational. And we can't do this work if we don't know and trust each other. So I think this is a really amazing exercise and activity for getting to really know each other on a deeper level. Particularly, I think in a work context, we don't always. We're like, how was your weekend? Fine. How was your, but like to really get to know like who are these people that I'm working with, their identities, their histories, it builds deeper bonds and trust. So I really like this exercise.
Awesome. All right. Okay. Well, thank you all for that. We're going to move on to our second objective for today, which is thinking about how implicit bias and privilege play a role in the work that we do. And so first, I thought it important to really just make sure we're on the same understanding for exactly what is implicit and or unconscious bias, as it is called. And this is just this recognition that we are always creating meaning on everything in life. I mean, it is the thing of being human. We want to create meaning on everything. The challenge is a lot of the meanings we create are unconscious. They happen in the part of our brain that a lot of times we don't have control over. And so it's really important to kind of think about the concept of unconscious bias, because that bias can impact how you interact with people. It can impact what you do in the world. So I found it interesting that only 2% of emotional cognition is available to us consciously. 2%. So it's like, wow, a lot of my immediate gut reactions are happening just out of, it's like what just is naturally occurring for me. What makes this complex is that most of our racial bias resides in that unconscious part of our brain. So some of the reason why I say we got to talk about race is because it sits in the part of that, it sits in our unconscious network, which means we've got to work harder to uncover the biases that we have because they're unconscious. Right? So to me, this is a really important thing to think about. I don't know how many of you all have ever taken the implicit bias test. There's one by Harvard that has been well studied. I encourage folks to take it. I've taken it many times. And as much as I do this DEI work, every time I take it, I'm like, man, I got to work some more. My biases, some of them are really strong, okay? And it looks at biases holistically by age, by gender, by race. So it tests a lot of different things. And it's important to know, right? Because once you have an awareness of that bias, it can help you create some shifts. The reason we talk about bias is because it does naturally impact our work. I think the other side to this coin is the term privilege. Privilege is something that we have to think about too. And so there is a really great video by a company called BuzzFeed, and you'll have access to this video also. And they do a privilege walk. I don't know how many of you have ever done one before. It's another really great activity that you can do, which is a little bit different activity. So they're going to model it here. If it's something you guys are interested in, you really can just Google privilege walk to give you the directions on how to do it yourself too. But it's another way of discovering the various levels of privilege that might exist even within your own community that you may not be aware of. So we'll take a look at this video from BuzzFeed, and let me make sure my share sound is still on. Great, it is. And we'll press play here and just see what you all think about this video.
Some people are born into families where they have to walk miles just to get water. All I have to do is turn on a faucet. That's privilege.
If you have ever tried to change your speech, if you were embarrassed about your clothes or house, if you would never think twice about calling the police when trouble occurs.
I think privilege is when some people have some things and other people don't have things.
I feel privilege is something that you don't even really have control over.
I think it'd be silly for me to say I don't have a fair amount of privilege, considering like the country I live in and the job I get to do and the college I was allowed to go to.
I suppose being a white male will help me end up somewhere towards the front, but I'll take a few steps back from being gay.
I don't think I'll make it to the front. I think I'll maybe be in the middle. That's just the gut feeling I have.
If your parents work nights and weekends to support your family, take one step back. If you can show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence, take one step forward. If you were embarrassed about your clothes or house while growing up, take one step back. If you have ever been diagnosed as having a physical or mental illness or disability, take one step back. If you have ever been bullied or made fun of based on something you can't change, take one step back. If you get time off for your religious holidays, take one step forward. If you came from a supportive family environment, if you can see a doctor whenever you feel the need, if you are able to move through the world without fear of sexual assault, if you took out loans for your education, if there were more than 50 books in your house growing up. So these are your final positions.
I think it felt kind of strange for everyone.
It's a hard thing to discuss or even reflect on. It was very awkward.
I think when you can represent it so visually like this and so immediately, it definitely takes on a new form.
I think we were like all joking around in the beginning. It was pretty lighthearted, and as soon as the questions started coming in, the mood shifted immediately, and we all it was just silent.
Just looking back and seeing like a bunch of people behind you is not a good feeling.
It's like weird how you want to like hold on to explaining a certain privilege, like, oh, but that's not actually me because like I had to work really hard for that. So it's weird to like take a step forward when you feel like you're taking a step forward with someone else, but you wear a lot of the baggage of like how those things were hard.
It was like more emotional than I thought it would be.
It reminded me of when they talk about slavery in high school and you feel like angry for a few days, but then you just realize like, this is how it is.
For me, it was kind of frustrating almost to look back and see how much further some people were behind me, and realizing that, you know, a lot of that stuff, no amount of hard work or even legislation can make up that gap.
It's interesting being an Asian American because you're not really sure where you fall on the spectrum of privilege.
I know that for me, one of the reasons I ended up so far back was that there are questions around safety as an African American, as a woman, as a gay woman. There are just so many different ways that I don't feel safe.
I feel like I just learned to be grateful for what you have. You know, we're in such a huge society where it's always complaining about what you don't have.
It just shows you that for some families, like each family, you're meant to do better. My grandparents did good, my parents did good, and I'll do even better.
I do think if you're not like aware of privilege, you should do this exercise, but it's more complicated.
You're muted, Nicole.
Thanks. Carol's rubbing off on me. So I was just curious, anybody done a privilege walk before? Been a part of a privilege walk exercise? Okay, so a couple of people, most people know. Okay, yeah. It's a very eye-opening thing to experience, really. Privilege provides advantages in society. And, you know, if we think about our social determinants of health, right, privilege plays a role into that. And so the reason we talk about privilege is because we have an understanding that health disparities, social inequality is built into the social determinants of health. And sometimes the privilege we have gives us access and ability that other communities may not have. Whether that is having two parents in a home, whether that is having parents who work at a time where you're at school so they could be home to help you. All sorts of things that sometimes we don't even think about is actual privilege. Did you have someone who could read books? Did you have books? Right? Did you have a bed to sleep in? What does your school look like? And so there's all these things that intertwine into building our health outcomes. Okay, so when we really start looking at the inequity issues that are happening in our community, we've got to talk about privilege. We've got to talk about the ways that there are systems of oppression sometimes. So in your book, there's a really wonderful graphic that I've come across called The Wheel of Power and Privilege that looks at these various domains in which the closer you get to the middle, that's what society has deemed the place of privilege and power. And then as you move towards the outskirts of these particular identities, society has said these are the spaces that have less power. And so it's really important to kind of think about how this looks for your own self. What are the identities that might be on here that you relate to? And if you were to have a community member or, you know, a community that you were serving fill out a circle like this, what might their circle look like? What might their spaces of privilege look like or spaces of oppression look like? Because I do believe as we really begin to uncover that, it helps us get a sense of where are the inequity issues that are happening in the communities we serve. So that as we really kind of take this broader lens through the social determinants of health, we can look at how do we create resources that address the spaces of oppression in our communities, because they're definitely there. So what I want to offer with this wheel of privilege and power is some questions for you to think about and ponder on yourself, not necessarily to answer as a group, but to think about where right now do you experience privilege? Where do you experience oppression? How do these systems interact for you individually? And what actually do you do with the privilege you already have? And really kind of thinking and marinating on these 4 questions as you set forth to do your work, as you set forth to do your prevention initiatives in the community that you're serving, to really kind of think and marinate on this. I will say something that really popped out for me on the reflection of the BuzzFeed is one of the gentlemen said, he said he looked back and he saw the people behind him, and he thought about how the degree to which legislation or resources could even bridge that gap of the distance between where he was and the person at the furthest of the back, you know? And I thought about that in his personal reflection there. I hope to leave us with a little bit more hope than he has, which is his thought was like, man, there's nothing we can do. Like, that gap is so big, I don't even think, you know, changes in legislations or policies would be helpful. And I mentioned that comment because sometimes when you start to do this work, it feels daunting. It feels like, man, there's nothing I can do to make the changes, to bridge the gap, to change the inequity story that's happening. And so I want to acknowledge that those are very, very natural thoughts to have, but to encourage you not to be overwhelmed by that thought. Because I always say, if we look back, we've already made major changes. Huge changes as a society, okay, from where we used to be as a community. So change is possible. It takes all of us to do it and to experience it. And I think it runs down to that really last question is, how do we use our privilege as individuals to really help move things forward in society? So I want to, I'm going to put up the Mentimeter question here, which I believe is a word cloud. Let me show the the thing here because we haven't done a Menti, and I want to capture this one because I believe this is a word cloud here. It'd just be nice to see. So you can pull out your phone or pull up a web page if you're at a computer. It's fine to do that. And I just would love to get from you, what are you thinking or feeling right now? I believe you have an option for 3 that you can choose. 3 words you can share, phrases, and it'll begin to build a word cloud for us, which I'll have coming up in the background. And then what I want to do is to just, oh, sorry, I think I saw your phone, Carol. I'll leave it up a little bit longer. There we go. And so then what I want to do is we've got about 15 minutes remaining. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your all's faces. We can talk and debrief. And then I'll show the word cloud that has been populated from what you all have put in closer to the end. I'll give you all an opportunity to put your words in, and then we'll look at what the word cloud is. So let's open up the floor. Any thoughts? Like what's in people's minds? What are you thinking right now?
I found the privilege walk, Nicole, to be very emotional for me. It kind of just slipped up out of nowhere. I did see that video once before, so maybe just knowing what I was about to expect to see was part of that. But it was, yes, it was very emotional.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
I felt the same way. Yeah. Sometimes it feels like there's, in the day-to-day, you can take actions to affect change. And then when you watch something like that, sometimes it feels like change isn't possible. And then combined with empathy for people suffering, it feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
I was also surprised by the video, but I think in a different way, because I was surprised that I was so far back with the steps when I have never considered myself to be unprivileged. I consider myself to be incredibly privileged. But based on those questions, like my childhood was very rough, but I'm not sure. I must have had good coping mechanisms and support system that I always I felt like everything is possible. And I liked how the one person said that, you know, that's kind of when he was talking, like it feels like same as when they talk about slavery in high school, like that's how life is. But then he went on to say that his grandparents did well, his parents a little bit better, and he's gonna do better. And that's kind of the mindset that I feel like my mother especially instilled in all of her children, is that you guys are going to be much better than I am. And I feel like we already have exceeded that. And now we're giving our children the opportunity to be even better.
Yes. You know.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Hannah.
No.
Okay. I'm so glad you said that. Really glad you said that for a couple reasons. In one respect, we call that resilience. And then I was going to say, there's often this misunderstanding that privilege equals success and oppression means failure, right? We automatically think that just because people have privilege that they will be successful. There's plenty of people who have privilege who have nothing to show for that privilege, okay? Just as there are people, if you take, like I know folks have taken the ACEs and have 9, and they're doing wonderfully well in life, right? So the challenge sometimes with the assessments that we use, whether it's ACEs or Privilege Walk, is they're very didactic. It's like, here's a scale, here's where you fall. It doesn't necessarily mean that a person is destined to some particular outcome because of where they are on this, right? So I was really appreciating you sharing that perspective that, wow, if I look at this, man, I'd be at the back of the line. But I in no way considered myself at the back of the line. Do you get what I mean? So I really appreciate you sharing that. Any other thoughts here? Taking a look at the chat. Chrissy, I wanted to connect with you here. I like your comment you mentioned there. Important not to assume you know the more invisible markers, yes, of the wheel. Yeah, so ability status, neurodivergence, mental illness.
Yeah, and could I just add a comment to that?
Please, yeah.
That I think like many people who have like either like mental illness or just like, disability or neurodivergence, like participate in something that's called like masking, which is when you sort of like project like basically like try to minimize your symptoms, minimize what's going on. And most people I know who have a sort of invisible disability or neurodivergence participate in some form of masking or I don't, it seems to me to be like not that dissimilar from a type of code switching. So I think that like you might observe someone and think that, like, oh, like this person's neurotypical, this person is like able-bodied, but they might not be like showing their cane around you, or they might be walking while they're in pain or something like that, or they might be acting like a neurotypical person. So it's just not something that you can assume about another person all the time.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Especially when we have a tendency to use our eyes to judge whether or not there's diversity in the room, So, yeah, I know I've been guilty of that myself. The first time I went up into the upstate New York area, there are a lot of people who look like me but are culturally not African American. They're from other countries, other places, speak other languages, other food. And because I was from Oklahoma, I only ever saw literally Black, white, and Mexican. That's what it was in Oklahoma. Like that's the language that's used there, just to give you a sense. And so talk about, a cultural awakening, because I never met someone who looked like me, who spoke Spanish, who listened to different music. And they'd be like, well, I'm not Black. I'm like, okay, nice to meet you. So for me, college became the space where I learned about diversity truly. So I really appreciate just thinking about that we can't always judge by what we see too. Carol, your thoughts?
So I have a lot of thoughts about this wheel. I'll lower my hand, but I'm trying to articulate my words here. So I look at the wheel. I am a white woman that has privilege. What I am looking at is how our society, some people can, as Chrissy was saying, like, you don't see everyone's limitation or, say with disability on the wheel. But people that, I have dear friends from Vietnam, and they walk through the world in a different way. They have education and a beautiful home, but in my neighbors, Black and brown skin friends, it's like there's some of these components, race as a construct, or that are just in our world burdensome, and they can't even get a break. I don't know if I'm articulating right. So
yes.
Help me with that, Nicole.
I get what you mean.
These are hard days.
They can't get a break. I agree with you, right? It reminded me of Chrissy's concept of masking. So there's some identities that you're unable to mask, right? So that you're unable to get a break, if you will, especially if it's in one of the spaces of oppression. So I think that's a powerful reflection there, looking at the wheel, Carol. Yeah. Wow. Well, I really appreciate you all in all the ways that you have been present right? Because it reminded me of what Allison said earlier, that this is hard work and hard work, right? We have spent a lot of time either dodging conversations like this or being uncomfortable in conversations like this. So I've really appreciated the ways in which you all have leaned in, have been present, and have really allowed us to kind of dig into some of these concepts. Go ahead, Carol. I know you said you had a few thoughts, so.
I'm more your unconscious bias. I feel like we could do 3 sessions on that, and you could help us and teach us and be better in our work in public health and prevention. So I just appreciate you mentioning that. And I think about the professional world I'm in and what the tragedies have been just in the last week with the killing of Tyree. And I want to know more. I do my own education, right? I listen to podcasts, but I feel like I need to be more of an advocate about using my privilege and my voice. And we had a BSAS conference, and I appreciated there was a presenter that said, you advocate from I. And I want to practice more of that. And I don't know if you can give us an example of that. And I'll try here is, I used to be an addiction counselor, and I in my prior life would say, I've had people tell me, or I've worked with people who feel. And what the message was for me as a woman, white woman of privilege, is advocate from I. So in other words, I see and hear in this work group, say, a real gap for the diverse members of our community, or some really hateful, bigoted comments. And I have to ask you to pause and let you know that this is what I see, and this is what I feel, and this is affecting our work or affecting our family dinner or whatever, instead of saying, I have friends that have told me they feel this way. Like being an advocate that advocates from I. Now, Allison was there and Lydia was there. So, and Nicole, you probably can articulate this better than me, but as just a tool for myself, because all this work is overwhelming, and it's a mission in our grant to live it every day, equity principles. So I'll stop and see if you have any reflection on what I said that some people like me can do.
Well, I want to actually offer an opportunity, because you are referencing a very specific training that happened at the BSAS conference. So I know Lydia and Allison were there. Did either of you want to kind of speak to this advocating from I, from your perspective of what you heard, or maybe a lesson learned from that to share with the group? I want to ask that first.
I think Carol did a pretty good job of explaining it. I think an example that they gave would be like saying something like, I'm not comfortable with proceeding with our project or whatever like this, because I notice it's not representative of different communities that I would like it to reflect, rather than saying like, other people might be upset if we don't include like one person from this category, one person from this category, and not tokenizing, but also like knowing that you can advocate for a group that you're not a part of without putting pressure on someone else.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said by both of you. I would add, I guess, just another way that I interpreted it was speaking from my own experience, not on behalf of someone else or on behalf of a group that I don't identify as. Yeah, and speaking from the heart, really, not as performative, sort of circling back to the beginning about a land acknowledgement, like speaking from my own experience, how it impacts me, how, you know, but not in a performative way, but in a genuine way.
Good. Okay. Great. Yeah, I would agree. So I think those are all great examples of how to frame that. I just want to say, just to acknowledge that in order to do that, you got to be courageous, right? Because usually what that means is the conversation's moving on and you're the person sitting here thinking, ooh, I have an issue with that. What do I say? Right? Which a lot of times it's like only in here. You might leave and talk to a coworker, leave and call a partner, leave and call a friend. And what that means is that in that moment, we have to be seated in our own courageousness to say, hey, I just need to share my thoughts on this. I'm uncomfortable with how we're moving or how this is being talked about in this space right now. And that's a self thing, right? So I love it. Just recognize that is easier said than done. The actual doing of it is more challenging. Well, let me show you all our word cloud here that you all have populated. This is our word cloud of thinking about right now. What are you all thinking and feeling? I appreciate the complexity of emotions that are here. And I am so glad you all shared multiple adjectives for what you're thinking or feeling. I will be downloading this to share with Carol to share back to you all so everyone has access to it. I will also share the World Trust Learning larger curriculum information to that, so if you all want to look at some of those pieces. The only activity I used from that was the first one that we did, so you can look into more of that there. I have really, really appreciated our time together, you all. This has been such a wonderful experience for me. I've learned a lot in our time. You all have shared so much about yourself. I know we'll be talking more. This is it's not goodbye. So we'll see each other later for sure. And I want to turn it back to Lydia and Carol to close us out for the day.
Nicole, thank you so much. And Allison, thank you. And I know we are 1 minute and we always want to be respectful of time. I know Lydia and I have been really appreciative. We are going to send you all out a survey. It'll be a SurveyMonkey anonymous, and it will be really appreciated if you all could just fill it out and give us your honest feedback for the way we structure for our grant and the small things we're trying to do to bring equity into prevention and public health. So we appreciate, we'll have some open-ended opportunities there, and we'll give that feedback too to Nicole, although it's going to help us as we move forward. We are really grateful to each of you. Lydia, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to say, but thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone, especially Nicole for these, and for Carol for setting everything up. I've really enjoyed being able to have these conversations as a group. It's something I feel like I haven't done in a little while since maybe I was in school. So I've really liked it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Please reach out anytime.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you all for coming.
Have a great day, you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.